The trading floor erupted in chaos as markets plunged without warning. Edward Collins said, "This cannot be real. Everything we built is vanishing in minutes." His words cut through the deafening noise of phones and screens flashing red. Wait. Anna Mitchell, said Edward. "The empire is bleeding. Investors are panicking, and the calls will not stop." The narrator described the collapse like a tidal wave, sweeping away decades of power in seconds. Nathan Price said, "Pull the reserves, delay the filings, buy us time." Edward Collins felt his chest tighten as betrayal crept into his mind. The financial empire that once stood untouchable trembled like a fragile house of cards. Outside, storm clouds mirrored the storm within. The narrator described Edward Collins walking into the boardroom, every step echoing like judgment. Anna Mitchell said, "The creditors are circling Edward. They smell blood." He clenched his jaw, staring at empty leather chairs that once held loyal allies. Nathan Price whispered, "Do not show weakness. Silence is power." Outside, the storm battered the city skyline, thunder drowning reason. Edward Collins said, "We will hold. We cannot afford collapse." Yet behind his eyes was the shadow of doubt. The walls closed in. The empire that rose with steel and ambition was now suffocating its creator. The night fell heavy over the city as Edward Collins remained in his office, lights from skyscrapers flickering like dying candles. Anna Mitchell said, "They will not forgive us, Edward. The empire is too fragile." He buried his face in his hands. Nathan Price leaned forward and said, "Secrets hold weight, Edward, but too much weight sinks the ship." The narrator described silence thicker than steel, broken only by thunder. Edward Collins whispered to himself that one hidden truth could ignite ruin. The collapse was not just numbers, it was betrayal bleeding in shadows. Edward Collins stared at framed photographs of the empire's birth, remembering the nights of sacrifice. Anna Mitchell said, "You gave everything, but they will take it all back." His hand shook as he touched the glass of a family portrait. Nathan Price said, "History does not care about sacrifice, only results." The narrator described the weight of memory crushing Edward Collins as shadows grew long. His empire stood on foundations built from secrets and half-truths, and tonight, they cracked like glass under pressure. Morning light broke through storm clouds, weak and pale. Edward Collins said, "The sun rises, yet I feel no warmth." Anna Mitchell placed coffee on the desk and whispered, "The markets open in 1 hour, judgment comes." Nathan Price said, "Prepare the statement, silence is no longer a weapon." The narrator described the empire breathing shallow, waiting for execution. Edward Collins stared at the horizon where steel towers pierced the sky, knowing one secret could burn them all. The narrator described the boardroom thick with silence, broken only by the storm outside. Edward Collins said, "Every number bleeds red, Anna. The empire is crumbling." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Investors are calling for blood. They want resignations." Nathan Price said, "Keep them waiting. We buy time by feeding them partial truths." The leather chairs seemed emptier than ever, a reflection of vanishing loyalty. The air smelled of fear, and the city beyond the windows glowed like a furnace ready to consume everything. The narrator revealed that night cloaked the skyline in steel and glass, while inside Edward Collins stared at glowing screens. Anna Mitchell said, "They want full disclosure by dawn, or lawsuits will arrive with daylight." Nathan Price said, "Truth is a weapon that cuts us open. Silence is our shield." Edward Collins whispered that every shield eventually cracks. The silence was unbearable, the kind that carried the weight of centuries of ambition collapsing into dust. The narrator described the morning press conference hall, filled with reporters hungry for answers. Edward Collins said, "We will restructure and emerge stronger. The storm is temporary." Cameras flashed like lightning. Anna Mitchell whispered, "They do not believe you, Edward. They smell weakness." Nathan Price said, "Control the narrative, or the narrative will control us." The words echoed across the marble walls, yet the silence between the flashes felt louder than truth. The narrator explained that behind the polished facade, Betrayal brewed. Anna Mitchell said, "Edward, one of the investors is leaking numbers, feeding the wolves." Edward Collins struck the table with his hand, rage boiling over. Nathan Price said, "Secrets are currency, and someone is spending them against us." The storm outside mirrored the war within, shadows dancing on marble floors as the empire began to fracture under its own weight. The narrator described the midnight meeting in Edward Collins' private study, where betrayal and truth converged. Edward Collins said, "The empire is not falling because of markets, it is falling because of secrets." Anna Mitchell whispered, "One secret is enough to destroy us all." Nathan Price leaned forward and said, "Then bury it deeper, or let it consume everything." The clock struck 12, and the sound echoed like a final verdict. The narrator revealed the empire drowning deeper as debts mounted like mountains of iron. Edward Collins said, "Every creditor sharpens their knife, Anna, and they carve before we bleed." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Edward, silence no longer hides us, secrets are surfacing." Nathan Price said, "Control is an illusion now, Edward, the numbers cannot be silenced." The walls seemed to shiver as thunder rolled, the marble floor reflecting faces lined with dread. Every decision had become a blade, every silence another wound, and every hour the empire sank further into despair. The narrator described Edward Collins' meeting in secret with investor Charles Donovan, a man whose fortune decided empires. Charles Donovan said, "I can save you, but loyalty is never free." Edward Collins answered, "What price do you demand when everything already bleeds?" Anna Mitchell whispered, "Edward, do not trust him, his gold is poison." The atmosphere carried the heavy scent of betrayal, disguised as opportunity. Nathan Price said, "Desperation makes devils look like angels." In the silence, only the ticking clock betrayed their fear of tomorrow. The narrator revealed whispers spreading through the markets like fire through dry wood. Anna Mitchell said, "Edward, traders know too much. The numbers leak before sunrise." Edward Collins said, "One truth buried should not have risen, now it grows beyond us." Nathan Price said, "Information is a weapon sharper than steel, someone arms our enemies." The storm outside turned into a chorus of rain beating against glass, while phones buzzed endlessly, flashing threats disguised as demands. The empire cracked not by collapse but by betrayal that rotted it from within. The narrator described Edward Collins meeting secretly with Michael Harris, once a financial guru, now reduced to shadows. Michael Harris said, "Your empire rots from secrets, Edward, just as mine did." Edward Collins whispered, "I fear history repeats its cruelty." Anna Mitchell said, "We stand on the edge, Edward, and the abyss stares back." Nathan Price said, "Every empire falls not from weakness but from betrayal." The fallen mentor's words weighed heavy, like ashes of burnt fortunes, and Edward Collins felt time running out like sand bleeding through broken glass. The narrator revealed Edward Collins returning to his office, finding anonymous files on his desk. Edward Collins said, "This is the secret, the one truth they buried under oceans of lies." Anna Mitchell whispered, "If this comes out, it will not only destroy the empire, it will bury us with it." Nathan Price said, "Secrets weigh more than gold, and once uncovered, they cannot be unmade." The storm had ended, but silence hung heavier than thunder. The empire trembled on the edge, not from markets, but from the one truth waiting to shatter it all. The narrator described Edward Collins walking into the grand conference hall, where betrayal had taken shape. Edward Collins said, "Every shadow hides a liar, and one of them feeds the fire against us." Anna Mitchell whispered, "It is Charles Donovan. Edward, his money comes with daggers." Nathan Price said, "Proof matters more than suspicion, or our words will break us further." The chandeliers flickered as though the empire's pulse faltered, each reflection bending the truth in gold. Secrets weighed heavier than steel, and silence clawed like a predator waiting in the dark. The narrator revealed Edward Collins holding documents unearthed from Michael Harris, the fallen mentor. Michael Harris said, "I gave you the truth, Edward, but it will break you before it saves you." Edward Collins said, Then let it break me, for lies already cut deeper. Anna Mitchell whispered, do not show them all, Edward. Secrets exposed too soon will burn us alive. Nathan Price said, a controlled fire burns enemies, but wildfire consumes everything. The weight of every word filled the study like smoke, suffocating before it destroyed. The narrator described the late-night gathering in Edward Collins' glass-walled office, the city burning with neon beneath them. Edward Collins said, the empire collapses not from debt, but from the dagger of betrayal. Anna Mitchell whispered, we must cut ties before the knife strikes deeper. Nathan Price said, once we reveal the traitor, there will be no turning back. The storm had ended outside, yet lightning remained in their eyes. The skyline reflected their faces across the glass, fractured like the empire itself. The narrator revealed Charles Donovan, hosting a private gala, laughter echoing through marble halls, while secrets hid beneath crystal chandeliers. Edward Collins said, this is theater, not celebration, his mask is the dagger. Anna Mitchell whispered, every smile here hides teeth sharpened against you. Nathan Price said, patience is power, Edward, but even patience starves when betrayed. Charles Donovan raised a glass, his smile dripping with venom. The music drowned the truth, but betrayal screamed louder than violins ever could. The narrator described the confrontation in a dim corridor, away from the gala's noise. Edward Collins said, Charles, your gold poisons, and your hands bleed our empire. Charles Donovan smirked and said, power is not stolen, Edward. It is taken when others are too weak to hold it. Anna Mitchell whispered, Edward, walk away, his venom drips deeper than words. Nathan Price said, truth is a blade, Edward, and tonight it must cut clean. The corridor lights flickered, casting their shadows long and broken, just like the empire they fought over. The narrator described Edward Collins uncovering the sealed file that revealed Charles Donovan as the architect of the empire's ruin. Edward Collins said, this secret was planted to destroy me, and now it surfaces to finish the job. Anna Mitchell whispered, Charles Donovan's betrayal is complete, he traded loyalty for power. Nathan Price said, a truth this sharp cannot be hidden, Edward, it cuts through walls and masks alike. The storm returned outside, rain pelting glass like accusations from the heavens. The narrator revealed Edward Collins confronting Charles Donovan in a shadowed chamber, the truth burning between them like fire. Edward Collins said, you crafted this collapse, Charles, to inherit what I bled to build. Charles Donovan smirked and said, empires are never given, Edward, they are taken from men too blind to guard them. Anna Mitchell whispered, he wants ashes, Edward, not survival. Nathan Price said, then tonight, the mask falls. The air tightened as if even the walls recoiled from betrayal exposed. The narrator described the press leaking the secret at dawn, headlines screaming across the city. Edward Collins said, the truth has escaped, and now it eats us alive. Anna Mitchell whispered, investors flee, Edward, they abandon like vultures after carrion. Nathan Price said, the empire burns faster than we can douse the flames. The city outside erupted with flashing lights of media vans, the storm inside mirrored by thunder rolling beyond skyscrapers. The empire's fall was no longer private, it was public spectacle. The narrator revealed Edward Collins in council with Michael Harris, the fallen mentor, seeking a final path forward. Michael Harris said, you stand where I once stood, betrayed by those closest, undone by greed. Edward Collins whispered, then teach me how to rise where you fell. Anna Mitchell said, Edward, this is the last gamble, there is no return. Nathan Price said, the secret destroys, but sometimes ruin becomes rebirth. The fire crackled, illuminating weary faces etched with the scars of betrayal. The narrator described Edward Collins standing in the empty boardroom, the heart of the empire that now stood hollow. Edward Collins said, this secret may have destroyed the empire, but it will not bury me. Anna Mitchell whispered, we can rebuild, Edward, but only from the ashes. Nathan Price said, then tonight marks the death of an empire and the birth of something unbroken. The storm outside gave way to pale dawn, light washing over ruins that once gleamed with invincibility. The empire was gone, but Edward Collins still stood. The narrator described Edward Collins entering the war room, his empire's fate resting on one gamble. Edward Collins said, "This is the last throw of the dice, Anna. Either we rise or we vanish." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Edward, this gamble costs more than money. It risks everything left of us." Nathan Price said, "Fortune favors those who dare, but ruin never forgets the reckless." The air vibrated with tension, each heartbeat louder than thunder. The walls closed in, and the empire's destiny balanced on one dangerous decision. The narrator revealed Edward Collins placing every last resource into a single high-stakes deal. Edward Collins said, "All or nothing, Anna. We cannot crawl when the wolves chase." Anna Mitchell whispered, "This risk is fire, Edward, and fire consumes more than it spares." Nathan Price said, "The world watches, Edward, and silence will not shield us." The city beyond gleamed with neon lights, a reflection of a gamble too large to retreat from. Every second felt like a blade pressing against the empire's throat. The narrator described the global markets awakening, screens flooding with Edward Collins' desperate gamble. Edward Collins said, "The empire rises or falls in this moment, Anna. History writes itself now." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Investors chant your name, but half do so with knives ready." Nathan Price said, "Pray the tide obeys you, Edward, for tides drown more than they lift." The sound of ringing phones filled the office, every call carrying judgment heavier than chains. Outside, dawn broke, yet it felt like night had never ended. The narrator revealed Charles Donovan watching from afar, smiling as Edward Collins' gamble unfolded. Charles Donovan said, "Let him wager all, for even kings bleed when they stake their crowns." Edward Collins whispered, "I will not hand my empire to you, Charles, not even in ruin." Anna Mitchell said, "Your pride risks more than wealth, Edward. It risks the soul of what you built." Nathan Price said, "A gamble against a viper means victory or venom." The city's heartbeat pulsed louder than the storm, echoing the clash of will and betrayal. The narrator described the climax as the gamble hit its peak, billions hanging by threads of chance. Edward Collins said, "This is it, Anna. Either ashes or eternity awaits." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Edward, I feel the empire's heartbeat slowing, yet your eyes still burn." Nathan Price said, "Every empire meets its test. Edward, this is yours." The silence stretched long before markets roared alive. The room shook with the sound of destiny, and Edward Collins stood unmoved, eyes locked on the storm he had unleashed. The narrator described Edward Collins standing in silence as the market sealed his fate. Edward Collins said, "The empire is gone, Anna, but the truth remains." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Truth does not feed the hungry, Edward, it only leaves ruins behind." Nathan Price said, "An empire may fall, but its ashes still speak louder than silence." The storm had passed, yet the air felt heavier than thunder. Each word carried grief, but also fragments of defiance, as though hope dared to breathe amid despair. The narrator revealed Charles Donovan, arriving with triumph stitched into his smile. Charles Donovan said, "You lost not by chance, Edward, but because weakness invites wolves." Edward Collins said, "You mistake ruin for victory, Charles. The truth will chase you." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Edward, his triumph poisons itself. It cannot last." Nathan Price said, "The crown of betrayal carries thorns sharper than gold." And the hall echoed like a tomb, where victory and ruin stood face to face, each shadow longer than the other. The narrator described the investor's final verdict, abandoning Edward Collins like vultures scattering from carcass. Edward Collins said, "Loyalty was bought, and so it was sold." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Edward, they are gone, each name erased with greed." Nathan Price said, "Let them go, for ashes cannot bind the wind." Charles Donovan laughed, "Empires fall so others can reign." The silence after his words rang louder than applause, a silence that crowned betrayal as the victor, for now. The narrator revealed Michael Harris, returning to Edward Collins with solemn eyes, offering wisdom carved from ruin. Michael Harris said, "Empires are built on men, not marble, and men rise again." Edward Collins whispered, "The empire is ashes, but the flame within me still burns." Anna Mitchell said, "We cannot rebuild with gold, Edward, only with trust." Nathan Price said, "Trust is the only currency left, and it must not be spent in silence again." The fire flickered, lighting their faces with fragile hope. The narrator described Edward Collins stepping into the dawn, empire in ruins, but resolve unbroken. Edward Collins said, "One secret destroyed my empire, but no secret will bury my name." Anna Mitchell whispered, "Edward, even in ruin, your shadow stands tall." Nathan Price said, "This is not the end, but the silence before rebirth." Charles Donovan's triumph echoed faintly, but so did the quiet defiance of those left behind. The city breathed, carrying whispers of ruin, betrayal, and the faint spark of resurrection.